Testing, testing. Yes, my mic is making the fancy bar move up. Okay, I am not here to sing. I am here to present a practice presentation that I'm doing tomorrow. Okay. Measurement and technology. A critical perspective on how technology shapes how we measure, which in turn shapes the axioms of our thinking, or when the methodology becomes the theory. I'd like to begin with the discussion question. What do you guys think this topic might be about? Like, what do these two terms have to do with each other? Because I was genuinely surprised about the text's point. Though maybe you guys read this chapter and know already. But I'm going to ask anyways. Measurement and technology. What do you think this topic might be about? Oops. And since this is a seminar, this is the point when I would wait for the class to answer the question, because seminars are discussions, and lectures are not. But since this is a practice, onwards we go. Thank you for your input, classmates. When your only tool is a hammer, everything begins to look like a nail. If there's one single takeaway... Ugh, sorry, dear YouTube audience. I'm also editing. Oh, can I just... Whoa, technology. Okay. There's one single takeaway from this seminar. It is that line. I'll say it again. When your only tool is a hammer, everything begins to look like a nail. Measurement and technology. A critical perspective on how technology shapes how we measure, which in turn shapes the axioms of our thinking, or when the methodology becomes the theory. When I actually present this tomorrow, I don't think I will say that twice like I did today. In today's seminar, I'd like to present you with 3 examples of this. First example, statistics, quantitative versus qualitative variables, and intelligence. Should I make variables be data? No, variables are data. So, I'm sure you guys remember Dr. Dan saying in an earlier lecture how most psychology researchers do quantitative research rather than qualitative. When he asked us which one we think happens more, I answered confidently wrongly qualitative, because that just seems to me more so what the subjective nature of psychological research would be all about. Like, how do you quantify the qualitative nature of intelligence? Well, allow me to take you guys on a journey of how previous psychologists tried, and the pitfalls they encountered along the way. Science likes numbers and statistics. They're nice and objective. For psychology, however, quantifying the phenomena it studies has been, as the text says, a perennial problem. Yes, I had to Google the word perennial. Any plant that persists for several years, usually with new herbaceous growth from a part that survives from growing season to growing season. In other words, the perennial problem never goes away. And psychometrics, as they call it, began, as the text says, with Francis Galton. Galton was measuring ability, and needed some way to measure the variations between his subjects. So, based on L.A. Quetelet's early 19th century mathematical work, and together with Carl Pearson, they created the statistical system we all know and love today. Standard deviations, correlations, bell curves, and the foundation for the mysterious and enigmatic numbers known as p-values, which everyone totally understands. The question then was what to measure with this fancy new tech. And so they measured reaction times and memory span, while seeming to assume these low-level measurable functions would correlate with higher-level, harder-to-measure functions such as intelligence. Meanwhile, in the United States, a fellow named J. McKean Cattell shared those assumptions and conducted a little study to test them. One year at Columbia University, Mr. Cattell had all freshmen's reaction times and memory spans measured. 4 years later, he eagerly looked at their final grades, and, drum roll, there was no significant correlation. Now look, like it does seem oh, I better, just so I don't derp. Now, look, like. Now look, like, it does seem eventually, after much trial and error, which the text goes over in much detail, which I don't have time to cover as it would turn out, some actual measure of intelligence has been quantified, because we know IQ, as measured today, is correlated with things like academic and occupational success. But the question is, are these weird results? Like, is what we're calling IQ actually a general measure of intelligence? Or is it merely a measure of how well one does at Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic things, like tests? For instance, suppose we met one of those Amazonian tribes people who have a totally different way of life, and suppose we had an interpreter. I want to say, and further suppose we haven't, we have, not had, it's not past tense, we have an interpreter who could administer such an IQ test. And they surely would not score well on that test, but yet can we say they are not intelligent? I bet they're way more intelligent than we are in terms of how to survive in the Amazon jungle. Or like the text critically asks, what about emotional intelligence? It seems that in quantifying the qualitative nature of psychological phenomena such as intelligence, we run the risk of actually defining the very thing we're trying to measure in our attempt to measure it, i.e., the methodology becomes the theory. The text said that line, and I liked it. So question to you guys, what do you think about IQ tests? Oh, this is another glorious moment to pause for the class to answer. I will take a drink of my coffee. Thank you, class. Imaginary class. Alright, on to example number 2. I want to quote the text's line here. The availability of new instruments of measurement immediately stimulates us to think of new ways of exploiting them. Thus do I present to you the ergograph. Look at this thing. I guess I should try to briefly explain it on this slide. Or maybe... Oh, I should. Okay, little edit. I've been working on this for hours. I'm so excited to be done. I'll just put you here. Go right like that. Go up, 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 up. Oh my god, that's gonna drive me crazy. Go down. We live with it. It's gonna... Oh, I'll lose my mind trying to get that right. Okay. The ergograph. This bad boy... Why can't it be aligned? This bad boy draws a nice wobbly line on paper based on finger movements, which is perfect for statistically graphing data. Look at that little thing, right? You hold the little handle, move your little finger, and it makes nice lines of data. Scientists love data. Psychologists of this device's day used it to measure such things as amplitude of finger movements, muscular reactions, and even fatigue. This even made its way into psychology textbooks of the early 1900s. It reminds me of sometimes I speak in such weird ways. This reminds me of phrenology, as I would like to say it for some reason. Which is, of course, the science of measuring the way your skull is shaped to determine your personality. Well, that one has went the way of the dodo bird. Nice, clean, reliable data, but questionable validity. Which, for my non-psychology classmates, if you happen to be watching this video as a random person, someone I know, whatever, and you don't know, validity is, like, is your measurement actually measuring what you're saying it's measuring, whereas reliability is like, can you reliably get a measurement? It can be reliable, but it's not always valid. Correlation does not equal causation. The text says the availability of the ergograph prompted psychologists to come up with potential research amenable to its use. And this is where the text says that fire line, when your only tool is a hammer, everything begins to look like a nail. And indeed, alas, the ergograph has not stood the test of time. The text also suggests here that perhaps brain imaging technology is in fact our modern-day ergograph. Not gonna lie, that suggestion spooked me because I've based a lot of my thinking on brain imaging results. Question to you guys, my dear classmates, who are not here right now. What do you think of the possibility that all the theories we've based off of brain imaging technology could in fact be as meaningless as the data gleaned from the ergograph? I ain't waiting. Well, let me have a little sip, because I'm probably going to spend like 5 minutes reading my class's answers or something. French vanilla with a shot of espresso. Glorious. Okay, my third example, and final example. Questionnaires. Dun 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 dun. One does not simply design a questionnaire by thinking of 20 relevant questions and counting the yeses. I think I'm funny. The text's author says they have no quarrel with the reliability of such measurements. What they are concerned about is what these measurements claim to measure. Validity. The example the text gives is in measuring the concept of authoritarianism, which apparently developed after World War II as part of psychologists' efforts to understand Nazi anti-Semitism. The little comma thing, apostrophe after the S threw me off there. Via questionnaires, some psychologists came to the conclusion that a combination of traits produced a particular syndrome known as authoritarian personality. This authoritarian personality included, I'm going to say it like that every time, included factors or traits such as being rigid and close-minded, intolerant of ambiguity, happiest in hierarchical organizations, held obedience to authority in high esteem, disliked modern art, etc., etc., etc. Ironically, in a manner that sheds light on just how objective these attempts at quantifying the qualitative are. At the same time, a Nazi psychologist came to similar conclusions, but in reverse. This Nazi psychologist's concept of authoritarianism included factors or traits such as strong-willed, disciplined, had unmuddled ideas, etc., while his concept of the anti-authoritarian or democratic personality trait had the negative factors, or is the one that had that for him had need the excitement. The negative factors or traits, such as undisciplined. I'm so good at camouflaging, I'm a normal person too. Well, his concept of the anti-authoritarian or democratic personality trait is the one that for him had the negative factors or traits such as undisciplined, dreamy, changeable, unwilling to respect authority, etc. Yeah, look at me saying things in the correct tones. Here are some questions the democratic psychologists asked in their F for fascism scale. The idea being, if you answer yes, you are authoritarian. After the war, we may expect a crime wave. The control of gangsters and ruffians will become a major social problem. Reports of atrocities in Europe have been greatly exaggerated for propaganda purposes. Homosexuality is a particularly rotten form of delinquency and ought to be severely punished. Although many people may scoff, it may yet be shown that astrology can explain a lot of things. Why is astrology lumped in with this? And here are some questions from the Nazi psychologist's scale entitled The Social Attitude Inventory. He apparently was trying to distinguish radicalism, conservatism, oh, why aren't you there, whatever this is called, be there thing. Radicalism conservatism from tough, tender-minded conservatism. Isn't it so neat the way we can paint narratives with our word choices? Sheesh. I digress. I don't digress. I continue on. Divorce laws should be altered to make divorce easier. Birth control, except when recommended by a doctor, should be made illegal. European refugees should be left to fend for themselves. It would be best to keep colored people in their own districts and schools in order to prevent too much contact with whites. Tough, tender-minded authoritarianism. So, takeaways. Oh my god, what am I? Obviously, authoritarianism as a concept exists. But doesn't it seem like these questions designed to turn it from a qualitative phenomena into quantitative data don't really make sense anymore in our modern cultural context? It's as if psychological phenomena like intelligence and authoritarianism are sort of culturally relative. So if we wanted to measure authoritarianism today, wouldn't we need to change the questions? But then, the text asks the fiery critical question, if you change the items, how can you claim to be measuring the same thing? And hey, that's a great question for you guys, my classmates. If you change the items of a questionnaire, how can you claim to be measuring the same thing? What the hell are these things we're saying we're measuring? In conclusion, though this critical perspective is something we clearly ought to keep in mind, it seems to me this curious nature of methodology sort of morphing into psychological theory is perhaps intrinsic to psychology as a scientific discipline as a whole. Is perhaps intrinsic to psychology as a scientific discipline. I landed there. I'm so excited to be done this, because if we want to study psychology with the scientific method, how could we possibly escape this pitfall when psychological phenomena by its very nature is qualitative, but yet science prefers quantitative data? And so, that is my final question to you all. Can you think of a way to measure things like intelligence or authoritarianism without falling into the pitfall of allowing your very tools of measurement to shape your theories? I've been wondering if I should use the word shape, but at this point I'm so burned out that I don't want to think about it anymore, and that's what we're gonna do. How long was I? I guess I need to stop recording to see. Bye!